All right, I can say you're about to drift into a world of sweet dreams, letting this video take you there. But wait, before you slip into sleep and forget everything, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's like magic that powers me to create more amazing videos just for you. But only if you really enjoy what I'm doing here and share your thoughts in the comments. Oh, and by the way, I'm curious. What time is it where you are, and where in the world are you watching from? Let's make your peaceful space even better together. Now relax and let's get started. Waking up in 1325. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news: you're alive. The bad news: so are the fleas. Your bed is a half-rotted straw mattress stuffed with bugs and hay that smells like a barn floor because it was a barn floor 3 months ago. There's no memory foam, no pillows, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets. Just a wool blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter and now weighs as much as a small cow from accumulated grime. You blink awake as the church bell clangs in the distance, an alarm clock that's louder and even less merciful than modern ones. Your home is a wooden hut with one room, no windows, and a charming open-concept floor plan where your family livestock and domestic insects all share the same space. The smell: a fragrant symphony of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something you pray isn't mold, but deep down, you know it probably is. Scented candles haven't been invented, and even if they were, they'd just melt on your dirt floor. You try to stretch, but immediately regret it. The air is freezing, and your joints ache. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms is roughly middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door, and your knees sound like a bag of rocks shaken by a confused peasant. Getting out of bed is a gamble. The floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks through the thatched roof, or crusty from something your neighbor's chicken left behind. Either way, your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. Oh, and privacy. What's that? Your entire family, and maybe a random cousin who never left, are waking up beside you. There's no bedroom, no curtains, no me time, just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe, where you're never truly alone, because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. The medieval bathroom experience. You've managed to crawl out of your haystack of horrors. Congrats. Now nature calls. And it's not calling politely, it's screaming. Here's where you start missing the modern bathroom. There's no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush valve, not even a mildly resentful plunger in the corner. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you're a peasant, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket behind the house already full, because Uncle Wolfstan had a rough night after eating bad turnips. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, do your business, and then here's the kicker: toss it into the street. Yes, the street. You're supposed to shout something like "Gardy Lou," Old French for "watch out below" before dumping it. But frankly, no one moves fast enough. Streets in medieval towns are open sewers, a charming river of human waste animal droppings and mystery liquids you'd rather not examine. If you're lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in an outhouse where privacy is a myth and ventilation is a cruel joke. You might make small talk, but try not to breathe too deeply. Toilet paper. Never heard of it? Most people wipe with straw leaves, rags, moss, or if they're feeling indulgent, a scrap of wool. Sometimes, nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't popular yet. And if you're in a castle, surely it's better, right? Well, sort of. You might have a garderobe, a hole in the wall that drops your waist directly into the moat. Great idea, except your enemies know this. And yes, attackers sometimes climbed in through the waist chute. Talk about entering through the back door. So whether you're a farmer or a baron, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. It's cold, public dangerous, and never not disgusting. One slip on a wet stone path, and you're face first in humanity's leftovers, and you still haven't brushed your teeth. But we'll get to that next. Breakfast, a grim affair. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward. Right? Maybe a nice breakfast, something warm, delicious, comforting. Sorry, this is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is a grim affair. There are no eggs. Benedict, no coffee machine sputtering awake, and certainly no avocado toast. You sit down or squat near the fire to a wooden bowl of something that looks like it was scraped off a muddy boot. Welcome to your daily ration of pottage. Pottage is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever you can find. Grains, root vegetables, maybe a few beans if you're lucky. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, with new ingredients dumped on top of the old ones. It's less a recipe and more an ongoing edible experiment. On the side, a hunk of bread so hard it could deflect arrows made from coarse rye, or barley flour, often bulked up with sawdust ground, acorns, or other creative ingredients, because wheat is a rich man's fantasy. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it. What about drinks? You're not sipping orange juice or an oat milk latte. You're drinking beer. Yes, beer at 6 neuro a.m. Why? Because the water is teeming with parasites and filth. So you start your day with weak ale, low alcohol, high survivability. Kids drink it too. No one's happy about it, but at least it won't kill you immediately. Want some meat or cheese? Dream on. That's for Sundays and saints' feast days, and only if your Lord is feeling generous. Most peasants don't eat meat more than a few times a year. As for fresh fruit, only when it's in season and not already fermented into wine. Don't even think about spices unless you're royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more than your monthly wages. Salt is valuable enough to be locked away, so you chew your gritty bread, gulp your medieval beer, and try not to think about the rat that may have nibbled your porridge in the night breakfast. Doesn't energize you. It just happens to you. And now that you're properly underfed, it's time to work. Like your life depends on it. Because it absolutely does. Getting dressed. 1. Itchy outfit. You've eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. Your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. It's a rough wool tunic or linen shift that you've worn every day for months, possibly years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. Just wear this until it disintegrates or gives you a fungal infection. Underwear optional. If you're lucky, maybe a linen under tunic. If not, you're going commando under layers of scratchy, sweaty wool, all lovingly stitched together by someone who probably had no idea what a seam was supposed to look like. There's also no washing machine, no soap, and absolutely no dry cleaner in sight. Your clothes are stained stiff and scented like a compost pile, marinating in a pigsty. Even if you wanted to wash them, it's not easy. You'd have to haul water from a river, or well heat it over a fire scrub, your tunic on a board, with ashes or lye, and hang it in the sun, which is out approximately 3 days a year. And don't get me started on shoes. If you own any, they're made of untreated leather, barely stitched together, and offer as much arch support as a banana peel. Most peasants go barefoot through mud dung and medieval landmines, aka sharp rocks and disease puddles. All this means one thing: your skin hates you. You itch constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free on your body. Everyone has them. Nobles, lousy monks, itchy children, walking insect farms. No one escapes. You'll be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and no one will bat an eye. Your skin is raw from rubbing your scalp, a battlefield of bites. If you develop a rash, too bad. There's no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone, no one to tell you. It's probably scabies. You just keep suffering. If you're lucky enough not to get an infection, great, that rash will simply accompany you for the next 6 months, like an unwanted medieval sidekick. Now that you're dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it's time to head outside and start working yourself to death. Oral hygiene, a dangerous game. Now that you're fully dressed in itches and damp wool, it's time to flash that morning smile. Except you don't. Because in the Middle Ages, smiling is a dangerous game. Not emotionally, but dentally. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no mouthwash, no floss. The concept of oral hygiene is about as popular as bathing, which is to say, not very. Some people might chew on a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar. But for the most part, your teeth are on their own, and they're not doing well. By the time you hit your mid-20s, your smile looks like something pulled from a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant. Gums are swollen, and those aren't just food stains on your teeth, that's decay. You have more rot in your mouth than a medieval root cellar. Sugar, while not yet widespread, is becoming more common among the rich, imported at great cost for small cakes, or to show off wealth. If you're a noble, congratulations, you rot your teeth faster than the peasants. If you're poor, you'll do it slowly, with fermented bread, gritty porridge, and years of hard chewing. Toothaches. Get used to them. They're like medieval weather, always there in the background. The kind of pain that makes you consider praying, drinking, or pulling the tooth out yourself with a pair of pliers. And that's not a joke, that was the actual treatment. Dentists didn't exist, but barber surgeons did. Yes, the same guy who cuts your hair is pulling your molars out by candlelight with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. Infected tooth. Hope you like fevers, because without antibiotics, it can easily turn into sepsis and kill you from a toothache. That's right. The same thing that sends us to a pharmacy today could be your funeral in the 1300s. And there's no relief on the social front either. Kissing good luck. Halitosis is everywhere. If you're single, you're not judged by your smile. You're judged by your land and livestock. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it's losing the war. Now that your teeth are throbbing, let's head outside. Because your real job, the one that will break your back, is just getting started. Work a slow-motion endurance test. Time to head to work, except there's no office, no desk, no coffee break, and no chance of promotion. Your job, if you're like 90% of the population, is simple. Don't die while laboring for someone else's comfort. You're a peasant. Congratulations. That means you work the land that belongs to a lord who probably doesn't remember your name. You rise with the sun and stop only when it disappears behind the trees. Your tools, a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones are still intact in your body. There's no weekend, no clocking out, just sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're not harvesting, fighting off raiders, or praying feverishly for your infected toe to stop turning black. The work is brutal. Fields are plowed by hand or with oxen if you're rich enough to afford one. You dig ditches, sow seeds, pull weeds, and carry water until your spine begins to resemble the letter S. No one cares if you're tired. No one's asking how your mental health is doing. If you're a woman, surprise, you don't just do field work. You also care for children. Clean, cook, spin, wool, feed animals, and pretend your husband's lice infestation isn't slowly migrating to your side of the bed. Children. They start helping out around age 5. No school, no toys. Just a tiny wooden rake and a dream of one day not dying of the flu. And if you're one of the few who isn't a farmer, maybe a blacksmith, tanner, or cooper, great. You still work with fire chemicals or animal guts all day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay, basically survival. The perks, occasional bleeding, break a bone, too bad, get a fever, drink some warm beer, and keep going. You can't afford to stop, not even for a day, because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, medieval Europe has a solution for that. It's called being replaced. So you grip your shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test. Weather punishment from the sky. Now that your back is on fire from laboring in the fields, let's talk about the weather. In the Middle Ages, temperature is less about seasons and more about ongoing punishment from the sky. Let's start with winter. There's no insulation, no central heating, and no weatherproofing. Just wooden walls with gaps you could throw a chicken through. Your windows are covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in the hearth is nice in theory, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it going because wood is expensive and gathering it from the forest is sometimes illegal. Yes, you can be executed for picking up the wrong stick from the wrong forest. You bundle up in your one damp wool tunic huddle near the dying embers and still wake up with your nose frozen. Your feet are permanently cold, often damp. Your fingers are so stiff, they feel like tiny medieval popsicles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's just called bad luck. Now fast forward to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your home turns into a clay oven. There's no fan, no cross breeze, and absolutely no deodorant. You sweat through your layers, but can't remove them because showing too much skin is scandalous and invites sunburn, insect bites, and social judgment. The flies are out in full force, attracted to your unwashed body and the smell of last week's goat stew still fermenting in the corner. Mosquitoes buzz by your ear while you sleep, assuming you can sleep through the sound of your neighbors yelling and babies crying. In the fields, the sun bakes you. No sunblock, no hat, unless you fashioned one from straw, like a desperate scarecrow. The worst part, you still have to work. Heat stroke is just called taking a bad turn. So you're either shivering in your hovel, wondering if your toes will make it to spring, or sweating through your only pair of socks while your thighs chafe into oblivion. And the one thing that never changes, no matter the season, your clothes still itch, your food is still terrible, and your next job is still waiting. Welcome to climate control, medieval style. There is none. Water, a murderous gamble. Feeling thirsty, need to freshen up. Want to splash water on your face to wake up from this damp fever. dream of a life. Too bad. In medieval times, water isn't your friend. It's trying to murder you quietly. Let's start with drinking. The nearby stream looks fresh, bubbling, and clear, like something out of a fantasy movie. But spoiler alert, it's not upstream. Someone just dumped a chamber pot into it. If not that, a dead pig is probably decomposing in it. Parasites, bacteria, and the entire microbial army of medieval Europe await in every sip. That's why people drank beer? Yes, beer. Even children. But before you imagine medieval kids doing keg stands, understand, it was small. Beer, weak in alcohol, strong in survival. Brewing boiled the water, making it safer than whatever flowed through the town ditch. Wine was another option if you were rich enough to afford it and unconcerned with functioning before noon. What about bathing? Surely water was used for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. People believed bathing opened your pores and let disease in. That's right. Washing yourself was considered medically risky. You were cleaner if you never removed the protective layer of filth caked onto your skin. Communal bathhouses existed, but quickly gained reputations as places for gossip scandal, and sometimes full-on medieval extracurriculars. So naturally, the church got involved and shut many down. Even if you wanted to bathe, it was a full production. You'd need to fetch water from the well, boil it over a fire, fill a wooden tub that leaked, and pray no one else in the house used it before you. Or worse, after rainwater collected in open barrels, where birds poop, insects breed, and moss thrives. Sounds refreshing, doesn't it? So whether it's going in your mouth, on your body, or onto your crops, water in the Middle Ages is less a life source and more a gamble. One wrong gulp, and you're spending your final days sweating in a straw bed, clutching your stomach, and contemplating all your life choices. Next time you sip tap water, raise a glass to our ancestors. They didn't have the luxury of hydration without hazard, medicine, polite torture. So you drank the water. Or maybe you stubbed your toe on a rock, shaped like disappointment. Either way, you're sick. You need help. You need a doctor. Too bad you live in the Middle Ages, where medicine is polite torture with a theology degree. Let's start with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, whether it's a cough rash, broken bone, or creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. The four humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, were, according to medieval science, the key to health. Got a fever. Too much blood. The answer. Bloodletting. Let's drain your life force into a bowl using a dull blade or a hungry leech. And yes, barbers often did it. Imagine getting a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. Feeling sad or anxious, that's an excess of black bile. The cure. Laxatives. Maybe a warm herbal purge, or just prayers. And a cold compress while everyone avoids eye contact and starts carving your coffin. Break a bone or get a nasty wound. You're in real trouble. There's no anesthesia unless you count passing out from pain. Surgery is done with knives that haven't been cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated over fire, not for sterilization, but because they look scarier that way. Antibiotics, centuries away. Germ theory, not invented. They think disease comes from bad air or God being annoyed with your moral failings. Got a stomachache? Must be your sinful thoughts. Hope you like confessing while vomiting. If your condition worsens, you'll be treated with more leeches, possibly crushed beetles, and a priest at your bedside giving last rites just in case. At this point, they're preparing for the cure known as death. If by some miracle you recover, everyone assumes God took pity on you. The doctor takes full credit, and the leech gets promoted. In the Middle Ages, medicine is less about healing and more about surviving the cure. Dinner, a risky meal. After a long day of labor, lice and leeches, it's finally time to eat. You shuffle back to your hovel, stomach growling, ready for the one joy left in life, a warm meal. Bad news. Your meal is probably trying to kill you. Food preservation doesn't exist. There's no fridge, no freezer, just salt, smoke, or the hope that winter air keeps things fresh. Your meat, if you're lucky enough to have any, has been hanging for days, covered in flies marinated in questionable brine, and possibly shared with a rat or two. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but even that isn't safe. In bad harvest years, desperate peasants bulk it up with bark sawdust or clay to make it stretch. If it's rye season, there's a bonus, ergot, a fungus that causes convulsions, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread, laced with LSD and tetanus vegetables. Only if they're in season, and what's always in season turnips. So many turnips boiled mashed or floating in pottage, which if you recall is a hot swamp of mystery ingredients, simmering since your great-grandfather's funeral fruit. Available in the fall, but it rots quickly, and sugar is rare, expensive, and hoarded by the rich to show off their blackened teeth. Dairy is another gamble. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese fare better, but are loaded with bacteria. People eat them anyway because it's either that or chew your boot leather. Seasoning spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg are worth more than gold. For the average peasant flavor comes from onion salt, if you're lucky, and pain. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard, it's a political one. Game animals belong to the Lord, not you. Caught poaching a rabbit, you could be fined, imprisoned, or executed. Your dinner could get you hanged. So as you sit down to eat your gray stew by flickering firelight, remember, every bite is a risk, but you eat anyway. Because in the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish it, tests you. Religion, your spiritual landlord. It's evening now. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested your suspicious stew. You might think the day is winding down, but don't get too relaxed. God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor Agnes, who will absolutely rat you out if you miss Mass. In medieval Europe, religion isn't just part of life, it is life. The church controls your calendar laws, education, if you can read, birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think of it as your spiritual landlord, and you're always behind on rent. Every day is structured around prayer bells. The town church bell rings in the morning, noon, and night, not because people need reminders, but because missing prayer is a sin. Forget to bow. Sin. Eat meat on a Friday. Sin. Think about your neighbor's wife in that one dream. Double sin. Hell is vividly real. Priests describe it in glorious detail. Rivers of fire, lakes of boiling blood, demons with pitchforks, and eternal wailing. If the plague doesn't scare you, eternal damnation will. You can't read the Bible yourself. It's in Latin reserved for monks, clergy, and that one noble kid, too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret everything. If the priest says your crop failure is because you didn't pray hard enough time to kneel harder. Tithes, 1/10 of everything you own, are mandatory. Grow wheat, give wheat, raise chickens, give eggs, have nothing. Congratulations. You're spiritually bankrupt and financially doomed. Holidays are holy days, dozens of them, and they're not for fun. They're for attending mass fasting, confessing sins, and reminding yourself that joy is a dangerous indulgence. Questioning the church is dangerous. Heretics are burned. Witches are drowned. Blasphemers are flogged. And skeptics are quickly reformed. So you go through the motions. You chant. You bow. You pray that your soul, after enduring this dirt-covered life, might land in paradise, assuming the priest likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God may be merciful, but the church, not so much. Women in the Middle Ages. Hard mode. If you thought being a medieval peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. All the filth, famine, and fear, plus childbirth, subservience, and social invisibility. Being a woman in the Middle Ages is like playing on hard mode with no health potions and no restart button. From birth, a girl's life path is locked in marry. Young bear children, serve your husband, die tired. Education, unlikely, unless you're from a noble family and sent to a convent. Your intellectual development stops around the time you learn to churn butter and patch a tunic. Marriage happens early, really early. It's not weird to be betrothed at 12 and pregnant by 14. It's not about love. It's about land, livestock, and alliances. Your opinion, not required. Once married, you're basically your husband's property. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and not complain. Because complaining might get you branded a nag, or worse, a witch. That label comes with a complimentary drowning or burning, depending on local fashion. Childbirth is a death lottery. There's no prenatal care, no sterile tools, no anesthesia. Midwives do their best, but minor complications can mean death for the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't survive 2. Once the baby is out, your work increases. Now you have a screaming infant in a lice-ridden hut, and you're expected to nurse, cook, clean, and still help in the fields. You don't get a break. You are the break for everyone else. Unmarried. You're suspicious, widowed, vulnerable, outspoken, dangerous. Women who didn't conform were often accused of witchcraft, especially if they had herbal knowledge, a strong personality, or just looked at someone funny on a rainy Tuesday. Even in the church, your role is limited. Nuns live under strict rules. No speaking without permission, no freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth always ranks below men. In short, if you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're expected to endure, obey, reproduce, and suffer in silence, ideally while smiling. Because even in a time of universal suffering, women were somehow expected to suffer gracefully. Violence, a way of life. So far, you've battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when you think your day can't get worse, here comes violence. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. The Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant hoping the local lord wasn't in a bad mood. Violence is everywhere, in the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is common. Punishment is brutal. And justice is more performance art than protection. Steal a loaf of bread. You could lose a hand. Accused of lying. Your tongue might get pierced. Gossip too much. Meet the scold's bridle. A metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth for correction. Accused of something serious. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. Prove your innocence by being tortured. Welcome to trial by ordeal. One version, stick your hand in boiling water, to retrieve a stone. If it heals without infection, in 3 days, you're innocent, if not guilty. Another option, you're tossed into a river. If you sink, you're innocent and probably dead. If you float, you're guilty and will be punished anyway. It's a medieval game show where the prize is survival and the host is rooting against you. Sentenced to death. That's a public event. Executions are performed in front of cheering crowds. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It's the medieval equivalent of cable TV domestic violence. Completely normal. Husbands were allowed, even expected, to discipline their wives and children. Street fights. Commonplace. You could be beaten for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And war, always simmering. Local feuds, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone's always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the knowledge that life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a club. Death and early exit. You've made it through the lice leeches, laundryless misery, and the looming threat of public disembowelment. But now comes the final chapter of most medieval lives, an early and unglamorous death. If you're alive, past 40, you're practically a celebrity. Maybe even called the Old One. Less a nickname, more a statistical miracle. The average life expectancy hovers around 30-40 years, dragged down by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children die before age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter is all it takes. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survive childhood, you enter adulthood already exhausted. Work begins as soon as you can walk upright, and by 25, your joints creak like a monastery door. You might be missing teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. Women face a deadly gauntlet: childbirth, one of the leading causes of death. No pain relief, no medical intervention, just prayer, hot water, and someone holding your hand while you bleed out on a straw-stuffed cot. For men, dangers are different, but relentless farming accidents, infections from minor wounds, a neighbor's drunken rage, a crusade gone sideways. Even walking to the market could be risky if you cross paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector. Death could come quietly from the plague, which turns cities into cemeteries overnight, or from famine thinning out villages for entire seasons, or from bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. Funerals. You're lucky if you get one. Bodies are buried quickly to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins. Just a hole, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth if there's space left in the churchyard. In medieval times, life is brutal short and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You don't retire, you just stop showing up. The medieval dream dies. So how's your day been? You've woken up in filth, relieved yourself into a bucket, brushed your teeth with wishful thinking, nearly passed out from hunger, worked until your spine cried for mercy, scratched your way through itchy wool, prayed to avoid the plague and barely dodged a public execution for owning a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe, still dreaming of becoming a knight. Think again. That romanticized version of the Middle Ages, gallant swordsmen, noble ladies and towers, heroic battles and feasts in candlelit halls, is a myth polished by fairy tales and fantasy books. In truth, the medieval world was gritty, cruel, and deeply unfair. Hierarchy was everything born poor. You stayed poor, born rich. You had a better chance of surviving, but you were still one bad soup away from dysentery and a hasty burial. Even nobles weren't immune to misery. Castles were drafty stone refrigerators filled with fleas, smoke, and politically motivated marriages. Sure, you had a fur cloak and a goblet of wine, but also a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish, or from an infected splinter. Not exactly luxury. The simpler times weren't simple. They were relentless. Everything took longer, hurt more, and came with consequences. Life was survival, not leisure. If you found a quiet moment to think, dream, or imagine something better, there wasn't much you could do with it. No upward mobility, no modern medicine, no internet to Google. What's this weird rash? You lived, suffered, worked, and died within a 10-mile radius of where you were born. But here's the wildest part. Through all this, people still laughed, sang, told stories, fell in love, and found meaning. Not because life was easy, but because humans are stubborn like that. Even in the darkest chapters, they made space for light. So tonight, when you slip into your clean bed with indoor plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, say a quiet thank you to the modern world and to your ancestors who fought rats, famine, and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Catherine the Great. From Sophie to Empress. Long before she was, Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, mistress of reform and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie born. Sophie, Federica Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst, in 1729. She was the daughter of a relatively obscure German princely family. Her tiny duchy in Pomerania offered little in terms of power, but Sophie herself had something no title could provide: razor-sharp intelligence, relentless charm, and a quiet, burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating, not a warm, nurturing figure, but a social climber obsessed with status. Sophie's father, a Prussian officer, was more distant than disciplinary. From a young age, Sophie learned to walk the fine line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, spoke multiple languages, and mastered the art of observing a room before speaking, skills that would become survival tools in one of Europe's most brutal courts. When Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began searching for a wife for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she looked beyond Russia's borders. Peter, of German descent, needed a pliable, grateful foreign bride. Sophie fit the bill: noble blood, Lutheran faith, which she'd be forced to abandon, and a reputation for grace and humility. At just 14, Sophie was summoned to Russia. She arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg in 1744, wearing thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a chess piece, but Sophie had her own game in mind. To become acceptable in Russian society, she converted to Orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexievna Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and life-altering. She wasn't just changing religions, she was burning the bridge behind her, stepping into a foreign empire with no way back. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in a fur-trimmed coat could have predicted what would come next: betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. From the moment Sophie stepped into the Russian court, she stopped being a pawn and began planning to become a queen. A marriage of misery. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was meant to secure her place in Russian royalty, but it felt more like a cage than a crown. Peter, heir to the Russian throne, was not the dashing prince of fairy tales. Awkward, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, he was more interested in war games than governing or showing affection to his wife. Some accounts suggest he refused to consummate the marriage for years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had adopted him. In contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with fierce determination, learning the language, studying its history, and memorizing Orthodox rituals. She wanted to belong. Peter wanted to escape. This mismatch wasn't just emotional, it was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutal power games. Empress Elizabeth ruled with absolute authority, but her health was declining. Everyone knew a transition was coming, and everyone had an agenda. Catherine was watched constantly, her letters read, friendships monitored, every move scrutinized. She couldn't trust her husband, her mother still whispering on behalf of foreign interests, or even her servants. Alliances could turn into accusations overnight. But Catherine was no fool. She learned to play the court's games quietly, cultivating allies in the shadows. She charmed military officers, befriended scholars, and developed a reputation for dignity and restraint. A stark contrast to Peter's childish tantrums and open contempt for Russian traditions. Behind closed doors, she read Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a young consort, she was building a vision for herself and Russia, a nation of strength, education, and reason. But there was one problem. The longer Peter lived, the longer Catherine remained a powerless wife to a man unfit to rule. So she waited, observed, and planned. She knew the Russian throne wouldn't be inherited. It would have to be taken. The coup of 1762. In 1762, after nearly 2 decades of waiting, watching and maneuvering, Catherine saw her moment and seized it with breathtaking precision. Empress Elizabeth had died, and Peter, now Peter III, was Tsar, but his reign unraveled almost immediately. In just a few months, Peter alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and lavished praise on Prussia, Russia's longtime enemy. He reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and talked openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his mistress. The court, wary of his erratic behavior, turned cold. The army, filled with generals loyal to Catherine, grumbled in corridors. Even ordinary Russians, devout and patriotic, saw Peter as a foreign puppet, mocking their traditions. Catherine, watching this unfold, made her move. In July of that year, while Peter was at his summer palace, she launched a bloodless coup d'etat, supported by key military officers, including her lover, Grigory Orlov, and his influential brothers. She rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia, was proclaimed Empress Catherine II, and won the allegiance of the powerful imperial guard. Peter, caught off guard, and without allies, surrendered within days. He was taken into custody and soon found dead under mysterious circumstances, officially from a hemorrhoidal colic, unofficially from murder. Catherine was now empress, not by birth, not by marriage, but by will, wit, and audacity. It was unprecedented. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim had taken the Russian throne without a single battle. But her real challenge was just beginning. Would Russia accept her? Would the nobility respect her? Could she hold the empire together without falling to the same fate as her husband Catherine understood? That power gained through intrigue could be lost just as easily. She needed to rule, not as a schemer, but as a visionary. Thus began her transformation from a careful conspirator to a reforming empress who would redraw borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what it meant to be a woman in power. A visionary empress. Catherine could have rested on her power, but she had something bigger in mind than sitting on a throne. She wanted to transform Russia, not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Peter idolized Frederick the Great and toy soldiers, Catherine admired Voltaire, Diderot, and the Enlightenment's bold thinkers. She believed in reason, progress, education, and the monarch's role as a servant of the people, even if she ruled with absolute authority. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, she lived it. She corresponded with Voltaire for over 15 years, flattering him while defending her autocracy. She invited Diderot to her court and purchased his entire library to support him financially. Behind closed doors, she pored over legal texts, debated reforms, and crafted policies to modernize the empire. Her early reign saw efforts to codify Russian law. In 1767, she formed the Legislative Commission, an ambitious project to rewrite Russia's legal code. Her Nakaz instruction was a political manifesto disguised as a legal document advocating equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the ruler's responsibility to serve the common good. For an 18th century Russian empress, it was radical. But Enlightenment ideals had to survive Russia's realities, a vast, feudal, deeply conservative land ruled by nobles who liked their serfs exactly where they were beneath them. Catherine knew this. While she advocated reform, she moved carefully, abolishing some forms of torture, expanding secular education, and building schools and libraries. But she also reaffirmed the nobility's control over serfs to keep them loyal. This was Catherine's balancing act, a philosopher queen in public, a practical empress in private. She walked a tightrope between ideology and survival, between Paris's shining salons and Moscow's gritty politics. Catherine wasn't trying to make Russia European. She was making it modern on her terms. That meant reform? Yes, but with an iron hand in a velvet glove. Expanding the empire. Catherine wasn't content with reforming Russia from within. She wanted to expand it outward, making it an empire worthy of fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great opened a window to the west, Catherine knocked down the walls under her leadership. Russia's borders stretched wider than ever before. She waged wars not just to defend her crown, but to reshape Europe's map. One of her most significant campaigns was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars fought in waves through the 1760s and 1770s weren't just about territory, they were about influence. Catherine saw herself as the liberator of Orthodox Christians under Muslim rule, and the rightful protector of Eastern Europe under generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin. Russia captured key regions, including Crimea, the northern Black Sea coast, and access to warm water ports, something Russian czars had coveted for generations. These victories weren't just military. They were symbolic signaling that Russia was no longer Europe's distant backward cousin, but a continental force. Catherine also turned westward, participating in the partitions of Poland, carving up the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth alongside Austria and Prussia. By the Third Partition in 1795, Poland was erased from the map, and Russia claimed vast new lands and millions of subjects. But she didn't just conquer with armies. She colonized with ideas, building new cities, expanding trade routes, and inviting German settlers to cultivate Russian farmland. The empire became a mosaic from the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched Black Sea. Through it all, Catherine remained the central force, reading reports, issuing orders, and overseeing her expanding empire. Critics called her power-hungry, even imperialistic. To Catherine, expansion wasn't ambition, it was destiny. A great ruler, she believed, was measured not just by ideas, but by borders. She didn't just want to rule Russia. She wanted to remake it as a civilized empire, feared by enemies, respected by peers, and loyal to her alone, a scandalous private life. For all her brilliance, Catherine was just as famous for what went on behind palace doors, and no, not all of it was whispered in libraries. Her private life became one of the most talked about aspects of her reign. She had lovers, not one or two, but a carefully curated parade, often younger, handsome, and sometimes politically influential. She didn't hide them, often rewarding them with titles, estates, and pensions if they behaved well. If not, they were quietly dismissed sometimes with a polite thank you and a promotion. Among the most important was Grigory Potemkin, a man as brilliant as he was bold. Their relationship blurred romance, politics, and partnership. Some historians believe they married in secret. Together, they shaped military campaigns, colonization projects, and southern Russia's transformation. Potemkin wasn't just a lover. He was her co-ruler. In many ways, Europe couldn't look past the scandal. Gossip swirled and satirical pamphlets painted her as lustful, insatiable, even unhinged. After her death, rumors grew worse, including the false, grotesque tale involving a horse spread by enemies to smear her legacy. Why the obsession? Simple Catherine was a woman wielding power unapologetically in a world where female rulers were expected to be saintly virgins or tragic figures. She refused to play the role. Ironically, while critics called her immoral, Catherine was philosophical about love and sexuality. She believed pleasure was natural and that personal relationships didn't have to threaten public responsibility. She separated emotion from governance, a feat few male rulers managed. Her liaisons were often strategic, surrounding herself with loyal, capable, politically useful men. When they ceased to be, she let them go, usually with a smile and a generous retirement. Catherine's love life didn't weaken her rule. It was part of her strategy, a blend of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied, and feared. The Pugachev Rebellion. For all her charisma and control, Catherine's reign wasn't without peril. In 1773, that peril came in the form of a bearded Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev. He was no ordinary rebel. He claimed to be Peter III, Catherine's dead husband, surviving the coup to reclaim the throne from the German usurper. It was absurd. Peter was long gone, but to Russia's oppressed lower classes, the claim didn't need to be true. It just needed to offer hope. Pugachev promised liberation, an end to serfdom, lower taxes, and land for the common people. His words lit a fire across the Volga River region, especially among Cossacks, peasants, and old believers. In a time when the gap between nobles and serfs had widened brutally, his promises sounded like salvation. The Pugachev Rebellion became the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Towns were taken, fortresses fell, nobles were slaughtered. For a moment, it seemed the empire might fracture. Catherine was shaken. This wasn't a foreign war. She could win with cavalry and treaties. It was a revolt from within. But she didn't panic. She dispatched professional military forces to crush the rebellion ruthlessly. Pugachev's forces were defeated in 1774. He was captured, displayed in an iron cage, and beheaded in Moscow, a public warning to all who dared follow. Afterward, Catherine doubled down on order and control. Her dreams of liberating the serfs faded into silence. The rebellion showed the limits of Enlightenment ideals in a feudal country. She leaned harder on the nobility, offering loyalty in exchange for absolute control over their serfs. This was a turning point. The empress, who once quoted Voltaire, now prioritized stability over philosophy. Reform became cautious, surveillance increased, and rebellion, even whispered, was stomped out before it could breathe. Pugachev lost his head, but he left a warning that haunted Catherine. Power built on inequality could only hold so long before the storm came crashing through a lasting legacy. By the time Catherine approached her final years, she had ruled Russia for over 3 decades longer than any female ruler in Russian history. From the moment she seized power, she defied expectations, reshaped her empire, and redefined what a woman and monarch could be. Under her reign, Russia became a European powerhouse, expanding by over 200,000 square miles, swallowing Crimea, parts of Poland, and stretches of the Black Sea coast. These weren't just military wins. They were strategic pivots, securing warm water ports and reshaping trade. Catherine left a cultural mark too. She helped found the Hermitage Museum, amassed one of Europe's greatest art collections, and corresponded with the Enlightenment's greatest minds. Her court became a center of sophistication, art, and intellectual ambition. In a country often viewed as backward by Western Europeans, she put Russia on the cultural map. She modernized education, founding schools for girls, promoted book printing, and introduced smallpox inoculation, even receiving the vaccine herself, an act of scientific bravery. Yet her reign was one of contradictions. While she admired Enlightenment ideals, she never freed the serfs, extending serfdom deeper into Russia's territories. Her reforms, while impressive, were top-down, designed to polish the empire without transforming its foundations. Still, Catherine's rule brought stability and ambition. She understood power was not inherited. It was crafted, managed, and defended. She ruled not by divine right, but by will, political brilliance, and relentless calculation. She was called many things: usurper, tyrant, reformer, seductress. Above all, she was effective. When she died in 1796, Russia was wealthier, larger, and more formidable than it had been in centuries. She left a secure throne, an expanded empire, and a legend that would endure. Catherine didn't just reign. She ruled with intellect, strategy, and an unapologetic grip on history. In doing so, she became more than an empress. She became a myth, the woman behind the crown. For all her power, Catherine was a woman navigating a man's world and reshaping it in her image. Behind the imperial portraits and state decrees was someone aware of how precarious her position was. She wasn't born. Russian came to the throne through a coup and ruled an empire that didn't want a woman in charge. Yet she thrived. Catherine was never content to be ornamental. She read constantly, wrote endlessly, and never stopped learning. Her daily schedule was intense hours of reading reports, corresponding with foreign powers, editing state papers, and managing a court of rival factions. She worked the throne like a stateswoman born to it. Yet she was in many ways lonely. She surrounded herself with courtiers, lovers, and artists, but wrote in her memoirs of how few she could truly trust. Her son, Paul, whom she distrusted and kept from state matters, grew into a man she feared would undo her progress. Her greatest emotional partnership with Grigory Potemkin faded into deep friendship. But his death in 1791 left a wound that never healed. Catherine crafted her image, carefully understanding the power of narrative. She posed as Mother of Russia, enlightened monarch, warrior, empress, and lover of the arts. Beneath those roles was a woman who endured rejection, betrayal, scandal, and rebellion, and kept going. When she died, she left a transformed empire, but also questions. Could she have done more to end serfdom? Were her Enlightenment ideals compromised by politics? Was she more reformer or ruler? History remembers her by a title she never gave herself, the Great. Not because she was flawless, kind, or just, but because she took power and wielded it on her own terms in a time when women weren't supposed to have any. She didn't just wear the crown. She rewrote what it meant to deserve one. The Red Queen of Palenque. In the humid depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque whisper stories from the ancient Maya world. Towering temples rise above the canopy, their limestone faces eroded by time but brimming with secrets. In 1994, one of those secrets revealed itself. A team of Mexican archaeologists led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez was surveying Temple the Thaint, a modest pyramid next to the famous Temple of the Inscriptions burial site of the mighty King Pakal. The Great Temple, they wasn't expected to hold much until they noticed a sealed hidden chamber beneath the structure, untouched by looters, pristine. When the archaeologists broke through and lowered themselves inside, they found a stone sarcophagus resting in silence. The air was heavy with centuries. As they opened the lid, red dust rose like smoke, brilliant, shocking red. The interior was covered in powdered cinnabar, a toxic mercury sulfide used ceremonially by the Maya. Within that crimson cloud lay the skeleton of a woman buried with care and reverence. Her bones were fragile but intact, her skull wearing a jade mask, her body surrounded by offerings, necklaces, diadems, ear spools, all crafted from jade and shell. Everything screamed royalty, yet no name was inscribed, no glyphs identified her. It was one of the richest female burials in Mesoamerica, yet a total enigma. Why was she buried in red powder? Who was she, a queen, a priestess, perhaps Paco's wife? The researchers called her the Red Queen, and the name stuck. Even with modern forensics, they couldn't say for sure who she was, only that she lived around the 7th century during Palenque's golden age. Unlike most Maya tombs, hers was hidden untouched and purposefully isolated. Her burial wasn't just ceremonial, it was spiritual. This woman wasn't meant to be remembered with words, but through ritual color and the mystery she left behind, the power of cinnabar. The most haunting feature of the Red Queen's tomb wasn't her jade jewelry or the sealed chamber's silence, it was the red dust. A thick layer of powdered cinnabar covered everything, the sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, the offerings. It clung like blood to stone. To the Maya, this was no accident. Cinnabar made from crushed mercury, sulfide, was one of the most sacred and dangerous substances in the ancient world. Its vibrant red symbolized blood, rebirth, and the life force connecting human and divine realms. Red was sacred, the color of sunrise sacrifice, life emerging from death. It wasn't just symbolic, it was spiritual. Covering the dead in cinnabar was a ritual meant to transform the body, preserving it, not for eternity, but for transition. In Maya belief, death wasn't the end. It was a passage to another cosmic layer. The Red Queen was being prepared not just for burial, but for deification. But there's another layer. Cinnabar is toxic. Repeated exposure can cause mercury poisoning, tremors, hallucinations, even death. The Maya likely didn't understand the chemistry, but felt its potency. It was volatile, powerful, dangerous. To bathe a corpse in it declared this person no ordinary mortal. In Palenque, few were buried with cinnabar. Pakal the Great, whose pyramid dominates the site, was one his body like hers, saturated in red powder. This detail sparked speculation. Was the Red Queen his wife, his mother, or someone of equal divine status? Her skull rested on a layer of jaguar skin, another sacred symbol. Around her bone needles, obsidian blades, and miniature jade figurines hinted at rituals performed in life or in her honor at death. Every part of her burial told a story without words, a story of power cloaked in secrecy. A woman prepared to cross into the underworld, not in silence, but in ceremony, drenched in the color of sacrifice, offerings for the afterlife. Surrounding the Red Queen's crimson remains was a world of silence, broken by the gleam of jade shell and obsidian. These weren't mere ornaments. They were offerings each chosen to accompany her to the Maya afterlife, Xibalba. At her sides were jade necklaces, heavy and cold, their polished surfaces radiant after 300 years underground. Jade wasn't just beautiful, it was sacred, symbolizing eternal life, the green of maize, the jungle's vitality, and the god's breath. Only the elite were buried with jade. For the Red Queen, it covered her chest, wrists, and ears, a sign that in life she wielded influence, perhaps divine favor. The most haunting object was the jade funerary mask placed over her face. Unlike Egypt's golden death masks, this one was subtle, constructed from dozens of tiny mosaic tiles mimicking her skull's contours. The mask served a ritual function to protect the soul, preserve identity, and present her as divine in the god's eyes. Scattered near her bones were bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell artifacts, possibly tools of ritual or symbols of her status as priestess healer or royal matriarch. One bone pin was engraved faint but purposeful, a small echo of her lost voice. At her feet and along the tomb's edges were sealed ceramic vessels, likely once filled with food, drink, or incense to sustain her spirit beyond death. The Maya believed the afterlife was a dangerous journey, layered with challenges. These items weren't luxuries, they were necessities. To modern eyes, the tomb feels intimate, not overloaded, but intentional. There was no gold, no chariots, just items chosen with spiritual weight, a map for the soul. Through these treasures, we glimpse how the Maya understood death not as finality, but as a transition of power. The Red Queen wasn't buried to be forgotten. She was prepared to ascend. Who was the Red Queen? For all the grandeur of her tomb, the Red Queen left a haunting void. No name, no inscriptions on her sarcophagus, no glyphs on the walls. From the moment her tomb was open, scholars tried to connect the dots. The most compelling theory is that she was Tsakbu Ajal, wife of Kinich Janab Pakal, known as Pakal, the great Palenque's most famous ruler. Tsakbu Ajal was more than a consort. Born into nobility, she married into Palenque's dynasty. At a young age, bore at least 3 sons who held high status and played a key ceremonial role during her husband's reign. If anyone could be buried with such honor, it was her. Supporting this theory is the tomb's location, just feet from Pakal's grand burial in the Temple of the Inscriptions. The proximity suggests a deliberate pairing, husband and wife rulers, even in death. Then there's the cinnabar. Only 2 burials in Palenque were found with such intense coverage, Pakal and the Red Queen. It's unlikely this was coincidence. DNA tests on both remains hoped to confirm a connection, but results were inconclusive, showing no direct maternal link to Pakal. This didn't rule out a spousal relationship. Marriage doesn't require shared blood. Some argue she could have been Sak Kuk, Pakal's powerful mother, who ruled Palank before he came of age. Others suggest a high priestess sister or royal ancestor whose name was lost to history's erosion. The evidence points most strongly to Tsakbu Ajal, a queen by title mother of kings and spiritual counterpart to Pakal. The lack of a name may not be an oversight, but intentional. In Maya cosmology, the soul lived on, not through monuments, but through ritual symbol and the earth's whispers. The Red Queen remained suspended between legend and truth, a woman remembered not in stone, but in scarlet and silence Maya, women and power. To understand the Red Queen, we must understand her world, where Maya, women, especially royal ones, held more influence than many realize. In Maya civilization, politics was a family affair. Royal women weren't passive consorts. They were diplomats, priestesses, power brokers. They conducted rituals, sponsored temples, and maintained dynastic legitimacy. Their bloodlines were political capital, forging alliances and securing claims to the throne. Take Sak Kuuk Pakal's mother. When Palanke's throne was vacant, she ruled as queen regent until her son came of age, not as a placeholder, but a ruler issuing decrees and overseeing construction. She wasn't an anomaly. Across the Maya world, in Yaxilan, Naranjo Kalakmal inscriptions show women performing ceremonies, engaging in warfare diplomacy, and sometimes ruling outright. They were portrayed in stelae and murals dressed in elaborate headdresses, standing beside kings as equals or above them. Their words were carved in glyphs, their names remembered until they weren't. By the time Spanish conquistadors arrived, much of that memory had eroded. The colonial lens saw native women as silent in a male-dominated world. But archaeology tells a different story. Complex gender roles, where power was negotiated, not inherited. This casts the Red Queen in a new light. She may not have ruled in name, but her burial, rich sacred beside Pakal, suggests she was a central pillar in the royal order. Her jade mask wasn't just decoration, it was a symbol of identity of power, held in life and protected in death. Her bloodline may have been the glue holding Palank's dynasty together. A queen wasn't just a queen. She was a keeper of sacred lineage, a voice in ceremony, a bridge between gods and men, a tomb of transformation. The Red Queen wasn't buried with treasures. She was buried in architecture, rich with purpose, layered with Maya cosmology, ritual symbolism, and intentional design. Her tomb wasn't a grave. It was a gateway to eternity. Found inside Temple 3, one of Palank's smaller pyramids. Its proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions is telling temples weren't built randomly. Their positioning was sacred, guided by astrology, myth, and dynastic legacy. Temple the Thene rises modestly, but hides an intimate secret. A sealed crypt, untouched by looters, perfectly preserved, constructed deep within the temple's core, accessible only by a steep, narrow staircase. The descent feels symbolic, a ritual journey into the underworld. The chamber is stark, made of cut stone, sealed for over 1,300 years. No glyphs or murals cover the walls. No ornate carvings tell her story. Perhaps that silence is intentional, a space not for the living to interpret, but for the dead to transform. At the center, her sarcophagus sits like an altar, crafted from limestone, echoing Pakal's grand coffin next door. While Pakal's lid is engraved with scenes of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's is subdued, the focus inward on the body, the cinnabar, the ritual, of death. Subtle architectural cues hint at meaning. The tomb aligns east to west, mirroring the sun's journey from life to death. The chamber is small, but powerful, deliberate, personal, a sacred enclosure for someone revered. Maya temples were cosmological tools, bridges between heavens, earth, and underworld. To be buried in one was to be elevated beyond the human realm. The Red Queen's eternal home wasn't an afterthought. It was a shrine where death became transformation, a ritual for rebirth. To the Maya, death wasn't the end. It was a threshold, a passage into the underworld. Xibalba. For someone like the Red Queen, this crossing was spiritual, political, cosmological, and deeply ritualized. Burial rituals were choreographed, rooted in myth, meant to guide the soul through Xibalba's treacherous layers, a maze of darkness, rivers of blood trials, and death gods. Only those properly buried, ritually prepared, and spiritually equipped could succeed. The Red Queen was buried wrapped in cinnabar, encased in stone, surrounded by offerings, all signs of an elite burial. Bone needles and obsidian blades in her tomb hint at auto-sacrifice rituals, possibly symbolic tools representing rites she performed in life or reenacted at her burial to empower her spirit. Her jade mask, assembled from tiles, wasn't decorative. It may have been a spiritual vessel, preserving her face and identity for the gods. Ceramic vessels likely held chocolate maize water or pulque to nourish her in the next world. Other items, stingray spines, shell trumpets, could represent spiritual tools, calls to the gods, or ritual communication tokens. Burial wasn't a goodbye, it was a transformation. The Maya believed in cycles, death as seed, burial as planting, afterlife as rebirth. Kings and queens were earthly incarnations of gods returning to divine origins in death. The Red Queen, covered in the color of blood, entombed in a pyramid honored with offerings, was prepared for rebirth, not as a mortal, but as a being tied to the cosmos's sacred order. Her burial wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her legend, a cosmic partnership. Just steps from the Red Queen's resting place lies one of Mesoamerica's most iconic tombs, that of Kinich Janab Pakal, in the Temple of the Inscriptions. Celebrated for its artistry, scale, and spiritual symbolism, Pakal's tomb makes the Red Queen's extraordinary, not just for what was inside, but where it was found. Her sarcophagus, hidden in Temple 13, directly adjacent to Pakal's monument, was no coincidence in a city where every temple reflected cosmic principles. It was a statement etched in stone. Many believe the Red Queen was Tsakbu, Ajau Pakal's queen and consort. While her tomb lacks inscriptions, similarities between their burials are striking. Both wrapped in cinnabar, entombed in pyramids, buried with jade, treated with reverence. These rituals mirror each other as if two halves of a sacred narrative. Pakal's lid depicts him falling into the underworld tree, a cosmic scene of death and rebirth. The Red Queen's simpler tomb lacks such iconography, but the symbolism lies in the pairing. If Pakal was the sun journeying through the underworld to rise again, the Red Queen may have been the moon, the feminine force following its own mysterious path. Together, they embodied cosmic duality, masculine and feminine king, and queen sun, and moon order and ritual. In Maya mythology, rulership wasn't singular, it was relational. Harmony required balance, extending into the dynastic court. By placing the Red Queen beside Pakal, the Maya preserved not just a marriage, but a cosmic partnership. Their proximity in death mirrored their roles in life, a queen not behind, but beside her king, sharing not just a throne, but a legacy. In their tombs, they speak without words. Two souls wrapped in cinnabar and stone, joined across eternity. One of history's most sacred silences, a lasting mystery. Though her name was lost, the Red Queen endures not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the ancient world's most enigmatic and powerful women. Her tomb, sealed for over 1,300 years, whispers across centuries, inviting questions that echo with every discovery. She represents a mystery, resisting full understanding. We may never know exactly who she was. No glyph carved her name. No stela told her story. Yet the care in her burial, the richness of her offerings, the symbolism of her crimson bones speak of a woman profoundly important, not merely a wife or consort, but someone with real influence, spiritual weight, and royal blood. The Red Queen forces us to reevaluate assumptions. She's a reminder that in the Maya world, women weren't silent. They led rituals, governed cities, shaped dynasties, while kings like Pakal took the spotlight. Her re-emergent shows power didn't belong to men alone. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, visionaries. Her legacy is more than treasures. It's the conversation she started among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Every jade bead, every layer of cinnabar, every architectural choice tells us something deliberate. This woman mattered. Perhaps the most extraordinary part of her story is not what we know, but what we don't. The Red Queen teaches us that history isn't just facts. It's a living puzzle, a shared longing to connect with the past. Her legacy unfolds wrapped in red, the color of life, sacrifice, blood, and rebirth. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, stares back through science, art, and wonder. She remains nameless, but not voiceless, mysterious, but not forgotten. She may have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death she rules our imagination. Her tomb was sealed in stone, her story written in silence, and still, somehow she speaks. Frida Kahlo, painting pain into power. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907, in the vibrant district of Coyoacán, then a village on the outskirts of Mexico City. Her childhood home, the Casa Azul Blue House, was filled with color contradiction and quiet strength. It would become a sanctuary, a battleground, and a museum to one of the 20th century's most iconic artists. Frida was the third of 4 daughters born to Guillermo Kahlo, a German-Hungarian photographer, and Matilda Calderon, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish descent. Her parents were opposites, Guillermo reserved and intellectual, Matilde religious and emotionally distant. Frida inherited her father's introspection and artistic eye, but also her mother's fierce resilience. As a child, she was imaginative, outspoken, and bold, reading voraciously and asking questions most adults didn't want to answer. At 6, Frida contracted polio, leaving her right leg thinner and weaker. She masked the difference with long skirts, but never let it limit her spirit. Bedridden for months, isolated from other children, she grew close to her father, who encouraged her to exercise, ride bicycles, and stay mentally sharp. Unlike most girls of her time, Frida didn't aspire to be a wife or homemaker. Her goal was to become a doctor. At 15, she enrolled in the prestigious National Preparatory School in Mexico City, one of few girls accepted. There she stood out for her intelligence, rebellious wit, radical thinking, and unique style. Joining the Cachuchas, a group of young intellectuals debating philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida was drawn to revolution, challenging tradition, even before the bus crash that would define her body and the fame that would define her legacy. Frida was painting herself into the world with sharp edges, unapologetic ideas, and an identity too big for anyone else's expectations. She wasn't just growing up in Koyokan. She was preparing to remake herself entirely. The accident that changed everything. On September 17th, 1925, Frida Kahlo's life split in two: the girl she had been and the woman she was forced to become. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They were laughing, teasing, probably arguing. Frida never did anything halfway. But moments later, the bus collided with a streetcar, and her future unraveled into pain, metal, and silence. The crash was horrific. The streetcar crushed the bus against a wall, splintering wood and flinging passengers. Frida was impaled by an iron handrail, entering her left hip and exiting through her pelvis. Her spinal column fractured in 3 places. Her right leg shattered, her foot dislocated her collarbone, and ribs broke her shoulder, dislocated her abdomen pierced. She was 18. A man covered her with a borrowed overcoat. Someone noticed her body sparkling, not from blood, but from gold powder she'd been carrying in a pouch, exploded on impact, dusting her broken form in glittering ash. Frida was taken to the Red Cross hospital, undergoing numerous surgeries over months. She spent weeks in a body cast flat on her back, writhing with infection and uncertainty. Her dream of becoming a doctor slipped away. But in that stillness, something stirred. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother rigged an easel above her bed, a mirror placed on the canopy so she could see herself, lying in plaster and agony. Frida began to paint, first out of boredom, then obsession. Her first subjects were her own reflection, because she was all she had. What emerged wasn't vanity, it was survival. The crash broke her physically, but opened a door into her mind, her body, and the surreal language of pain and identity that would define her art. The girl who wanted to heal others began healing herself, one brushstroke at a time, painting pain. As Frida lay encased in plaster and steel, her body fighting itself with every breath, she began to paint. What started as therapy became a language deeply personal, brutally honest, often hard to look at, which was the point. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers or polite landscapes. She painted pain, physical, emotional, existential. Her first subjects were self-portraits, not from vanity, but necessity. As she said, "I paint myself because I'm so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best." Her early works were small, painted on tin or wood panels, inspired by Mexican retablos, devotional paintings telling stories of suffering and miracles. Frida turned this tradition inward. Her body became the canvas, her emotions the altar. She painted herself, split, pierced, bleeding. In one painting, she's impaled by nails like a modern martyr. In another, she floats in a barren landscape, tethered to a broken column, a metaphor for her shattered spine. She painted herself, weeping, fractured, decapitated bare, but never passive, always watching. Her pain wasn't sanitized. She painted trauma's ugliness with beauty, defiance, even humor. Each piece reclaimed her body, experience, and identity as a woman in a world that tried to define her. She invented a visual narrative blending Mexican folk, art, surrealism, medical illustration, and symbolism. Her paintings were dreamlike autopsies, of her soul, framed in color culture, myth. By the time she walked again, albeit painfully, Frida was no longer the girl who wanted to be a doctor. She was an artist. Her art, unlike anything seen before. She took the worst thing that happened to her and turned it into creation. Frida didn't just paint her pain. She made the world look at it, turning suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. Diego Rivera, Love and Chaos. In 1928, still recovering, still painting, and just 21, Frida met the man who would become her most profound and turbulent relationship. Diego Rivera, 20 years her senior, already Mexico's most famous painter. Rivera was a giant of Mexican muralism, known for sweeping politically charged frescoes, telling the Mexican people's story. Frida admired his work, but wanted his opinion of hers. She brought her paintings to him at the Ministry of Education, interrupting his scaffolded work to ask bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego looked and said, "Yes," and not just out of kindness. He saw something rare, an unfiltered voice, raw, unpretentious, full of rage, irony, pain, and beauty. Their relationship was consuming and creative. Frida said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, an odd pairing. To outsiders, Diego massive, unfaithful, politically famous. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, already walking with a cane. Her parents called it a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate, but chaotic. Diego supported her art, encouraging her growth as a painter, but was endlessly unfaithful, even with Frida's sister Cristina. Devastated, Frida took lovers, men and women, including rumored affairs with Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, remarried a year later with different terms. Frida kept her autonomy, home money name. Their second marriage was less about traditional love and more about creative partnership and mutual understanding. Despite betrayals and heartbreak, Diego remained a constant force. He challenged her, wounded her, but believed in her as an artist, revolutionary, and woman who could redefine painting. Together, they were not peaceful, but legendary, an artist abroad. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York as he completed high-profile mural commissions. These years abroad brought her face-to-face with American industrialism, wealth, and capitalism's contradictions, deepening her political discomfort. A proud Mexican nationalist, committed communist, and admirer of indigenous traditions, Frida mocked the U.S.'s materialism and obsession with appearances in letters home. She missed Mexico's grit-color contradiction. While Diego painted enormous murals on factory walls, Frida created smaller, quieter revolutions on tin and canvas. Her style solidified, sharp, surreal, emotional, intimate. She produced iconic self-portraits, painting herself to survive. Her identity became her landscape. With her body in constant pain from the accident, multiple surgeries, and a failed pregnancy in Detroit, she turned inward. Her portraits showed her bleeding, fragmented, exposed, yet her face always calm, direct, unapologetic. One powerful work, Henry Ford Hospital, shows her on a hospital bed, crying, surrounded by floating symbols of loss, a fetus, a snail, medical equipment, a cracked pelvis. It was raw, graphic, deeply emotional, a canvas that bled truth. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in leftist politics, welcoming Trotsky into their home during his exile. She wore Tijuana dresses, traditional indigenous garments, as a political and cultural statement. Her art was never disconnected from her beliefs. Her identity, body, and ideology intertwined. While Rivera painted revolution's murals, Frida painted its human, cost the body in pieces, the mind on fire, the self always staring back. In exile and illness, she became a painter of resistance reclaiming power in Mexico. When Frida returned to Mexico in the late 1930s, she was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She was a force, an artist whose work radiated raw honesty, surreal symbolism, and cultural identity. The Casa Azul in Coyoacán became a sanctuary of color and contradiction. Bright cobalt walls, yellow trim, Aztec statues in the garden, monkeys and parrots wandering freely. The house was a living extension of Frida's imagination, blending tradition, rebellion, elegance, and earth. She surrounded herself with pre-Columbian artifacts, ex-votos, folk art, and revolutionary books, wearing bold Tijuana dresses, weaving flowers into her hair, and painting amid the scent of copal incense and the sounds of mariachi from the streets. This period marked an explosion of creativity. Her paintings grew more intricate, symbolic, and political. Works like the two Fridas revealed a divided self, one in European dress with a bleeding heart, the other in indigenous clothing, strong and composed, an autobiography in paint, capturing love loss and heritage. In 1939, Frida exhibited her work in Paris, where artists like Picasso-Breton and Kandinsky praised her fiercely original style. But even among the surrealists, Frida stood apart. When André Breton tried to label her a surrealist, she pushed back. They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality. Her paintings pulsed with Mexico, not the romantic postcard version, but the living, breathing country she adored. She used symbolism, skeletons, hummingbirds, hart's thorns, corn blood to honor her homeland's indigenous roots, while unmasking its violent past and present. Even as her artistic voice grew stronger, her health declined. Multiple surgeries, infections, and chronic pain became daily realities. Yet she painted through it, propped up in bed torso, bound in corsets, fingers clenched around the brush. Frida returned to Mexico, not to rest, but to reclaim her power through paint politics and her fearless embrace of self-defiance and decline. As the 1940s progressed, Frida Kahlo's body continued to betray her. Her spine deteriorated, her right leg was constantly infected, and she underwent over 30 surgeries, often in grueling succession. At times, she was bedridden for months, encased in body casts, or immobilized by traction devices stretching her bones apart. But she painted. Each canvas became a release and an act of resistance, growing darker, more defiant. In the broken column, she presents herself split down the middle, pierced with nails, a cracked ionic column replacing her spine. Yet her face is stoic, her gaze unflinching. Pain was no longer just a subject, it was her companion, antagonist, and muse. Her political voice grew louder. She joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote fiery letters, and called out imperialism and injustice. When her health prevented walking, she appeared at protests in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida was given her first solo exhibition in Mexico, a long overdue celebration of her art. Her health was so fragile that doctors told her she couldn't attend. So she did what only Frida would do. She arrived by ambulance, carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the gallery center on her hospital bed. Dressed in traditional finery, surrounded by her work, she greeted guests with tequila laughter and that fire still burning in her eyes. Her final paintings were both childlike and harrowing. In Marxism, we'll give health to the sick. She painted herself in a steel corset cradled by Marx's hands, casting away oppression's symbols. Her last known work, a still life of sliced watermelons, bore the words, "Viva la vida, long live life." Even facing death, she remained defiant, joyful. Political Frida's last portraits weren't just self-portraits. They were revolutionary acts painted in pain, but signed with life, an immortal legacy. On July 13th, 1954, at age 47, Frida Kahlo died in the place she was born, the Casa Azul in Coyoacán. The official cause was a pulmonary embolism, but those closest to her whispered of something deeper. She was ill, yes, but exhausted by pain surgeries and the long war with her body. Days before she attended a protest against the CIA coup in Guatemala, weak and wheelchair-bound, her clenched fist raised. Revolution was her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry read, "I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return." Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, Mexico's most prestigious cultural institution. Her body, draped in the Mexican Communist Party's red flag, was watched over by friends, family artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was inconsolable, calling her the greatest love of his life, despite his betrayals. But after her death, something extraordinary happened. Frida refused to disappear. At first, her name was whispered in art circles. Her works too political for surrealists, too surreal for traditionalists, weren't easily categorized. But through the 1970s and 1980s, as feminist scholars and activists reclaimed forgotten voices, Frida's grew louder. She wasn't just a painter. She became a symbol of pain, turned into beauty, of feminism, born through resistance of Mexican identity, celebrated without apology, of queerness, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, unibrow gaze, flowers in her hair became iconic. Her home became a museum. Her diary, a sacred text. Her paintings hung in the world's greatest museums. Frida lived in Diego's shadow, but stepped forward in death. She didn't leave paintings. She left a mirror daring us to look, not with pity or fear, but with fire. Today her face is everywhere, on t-shirts, murals, dolls, memes, posters. What makes her legacy powerful isn't that people know her face, it's that they recognize the truth behind it. Frida didn't try to be flawless or fit boxes. She was unconventional and didn't care to be, in a world demanding perfection. She gave realness, raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, contradictory realness. She celebrated what made her different. Her disability, queerness, politics, culture, turning it into art that transcended borders and decades. She's a global symbol of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, creative resistance. For queer communities, she's a fearless bisexual icon who lived openly in a time demanding silence. For women, she's a reminder that power doesn't require permission. For disabled artists, she's proof that pain can fuel the brush, not stop it. For Mexico, she's a daughter, reclaimed fierce folkloric forever part of the national soul. Her paintings, once dismissed as too strange or personal, are now revered. Works like The Two Fridas, Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, and The Broken Column aren't just seen. They're felt by anyone who suffered and needed to turn suffering into something sacred. She lived in the margins and turned them into center stage, embracing contradiction. A communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who loved again, a body in pieces with an unbreakable soul. Frida painted with conviction, telling her truth, and in doing so, the truth for millions who'd never seen themselves in art. When we see her face, we see courage, color resistance. Frida isn't gone, she's immortal.